Okay, and welcome back to Anonymous Animators. I'm here with my former lecturer, Charles Phillips, and this is a special treat for all of you because Charles is a very wise man and I really look up to him. Hi, Charles.
Hi, Wesley. Here's the cash that I owe you for that.
Thank you.
Wonderful introduction.
I'll edit that up. No, but it does come from the bottom of my heart, as I'm sure a lot of previous students have mentioned to me, at least. We have been very grateful towards your tutelage towards us, and you know what I want to know, and I'm sure a lot of previous guests on my show as well, and people who have been listening to it are very much looking forward to this interview. Oh. So let's head off and start off with.
Well, I do try. I promise I'll try to be a lot less boring than when you were all my students way back when.
Oh, no, don't discredit yourself too much. Your history classes, for example, as much as you downplay it, like everybody loved them that I spoke to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was always inspirational. You definitely made us love history, and the animation history especially.
Oh, well, I appreciate hearing that. It's a labor of love. I have and have had the good fortune to be paid for my hobby for as long as I've can remember, I guess, going back to about maybe 10, 12 years old. I've been interested in the subject of where all these films came from and who made them, and being able to see them. We live in a really golden time right now where you can see anything. If it survived, you can see it. And I still can't get used to that, because for so many years one would read about these things and you would daydream, wouldn't it be nice to see these things? The various film magazines, there was one very famous one, Film Comment, had an issue on animation, Hollywood animation, and there was an article about Disney, and the writer, the scholar, he frames his article on the Disney films of the 40s, he frames it with this anecdote of traveling to another city in order to watch a screening of, I think it was Three Caballeros, because you had to do stuff like that to see these films once upon a time. And now anything that I have the perseverance to hunt for on the internet, I can probably find. Maybe not always legitimately, but you can see everything finally, and you can finally learn from everything finally, you know? I always hope that the students take away, if I sort of could summarize the whole idea behind the history class, is to not divide between old films and new films, but to divide between films you've seen and films you haven't seen yet, because you can learn from all of them. It's a different style or whatever, but you can still learn, you know? So we're very blessed these days. We can learn from everything. You can see everything. And it's a very exciting time.
Oh, definitely. I know, again, with previous students, my classmates, I know Matthew Bleasdale, he is also, before even coming here, he was very fond of watching other films, and I did that too. I just love watching movies, even my friend Joel. But after, again, your history classes and even the story classes here at Van Arts, teaching us how to dissect the films and also understand and appreciate the different ways of approaching storytelling, coupled now with what you're saying of being able to get all that information at our fingertips, it has definitely, I think, grown the industry. As you know, like people are experimenting a lot more, because there's definitely that flux of movies where every now and then it's just the same old stuff, but every now and then a company will come out with something amazing. Mm-hmm. We recently watched Book of Life. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah, not yet.
Well, basically, I'm not going to give any details of the story, but the style of animation where they, I think Joel called it experimental animation, where they used puppets. Like the design of wooden puppets, but they were animated like I guess like how classical animation is animated, and it was just very interesting to be witness to that.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah. Well, experimental animation, that's sort of a catch-all container for an approach that doesn't quite fit into the existing categories of hand-drawn or 2D or 3D or whatever. sometimes gets quite esoteric. A pin board with all these little push pins inside of a particular color, and by pressing them in various patterns, you create sort of by the shadows of these things on the other side, you create an image, and by pressing them in different combinations and taking a frame, you have I can't remember what it was called, push pin animation or something, and the definition of movement ends up being tied into all these different approaches, the different styles and so on. The Flash and Harmony owe a certain homage to cutout animation. Once upon a time, that was a form of experimental animation. We just have little pieces of paper cut out. The very first feature film, technically, was a cutout animation film, the German film, the Prince Ahmed cartoon out of Lottie Reiniger. It was years before Disney. There's always an asterisk to her contribution in the Snow White, first Disney films, claim to the title of first feature film, because it always gets down, as it is with firsts of anything. It's your definition of something. What's the first time that this definition of what's the first sound film, or what's your definition of a sound film? What's the first color film, or what's your definition of a color film, and so on. Same with features.
All right. Well, basically, what I'd like to really get into with this interview is I'd like to know more about how you became an animator. Exactly, if you can pinpoint it, when you watched a show, maybe, or what exactly pushed you towards this path.
Well, it's a pretty funny story, I guess. I'd always drawn, and I'd always loved cartoons. And because I love cartoons, I always drew all the time. I was dopey enough, I guess, to dare to make my own cartoons when I was a teenager. In those days, that kind of thing took a lot of initiative. Unlike today, you scan it, it's so easy. Back then, you needed all kinds of equipment, and how could you learn how to do anything? And to see your film, I had to send it in the mail to get developed. And 2-3 weeks later, I would get it back exposed, and I could see what I was doing. That was the loop back then, before video, even, let alone before today and scanning and so on, digital. So I'd always been interested, and as I got sort of better drawing chops as a teenager, I started making my own silly little things. Very Tex Avery inspired. That was my thing. Very Tom and Jerry. I tried to do my own Tom and Jerry cartoon. I loved it so much. In Quebec, where I'm from, the province of Quebec, the community college system is called the CEGEP. That's an acronym, and I no longer remember what all the letters stand for, but CEGEP, Community College. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do as a profession. Everything that I liked, I didn't think I could make any money at. So essentially, to sort of buy time for myself, I took classes in, I don't know, drawing or this, that, and the other thing. And one of the classes they had in their creative arts program was called animation. And I guess I would have been maybe 17, 18 this time. And I thought, I like animation. I'll do it, see what that's like, And boy, the teacher, Louise Siegel, bless her heart, she would see all these silly little nonsense things that I was doing. But she could see, I suppose, the passion I had for doing them well and for learning more. She was a filmmaker herself. She worked with and for the National Film Board, the Montreal office. And through that connection, she knew real animators. And so one day she said, Charles, tell you what, why don't I arrange to have you bring your cartoons here, your films. We'll show them to some NFB animators. And she told me who it was, this person, that person, this other person, and so on. And I didn't know who they were, They were famous Canadian artists, so I didn't know who they were, being Canadian. But, okay, I'll learn some more, so I'm sure. Because how could you learn anything in those days? You couldn't see anything. So she sort of drove me over downtown to the studio. And now looking back, I can only imagine what these guys must have thought of my nonsense things that I was showing, but very politely gave me some time. And one of the guys, he says, "Have you ever heard of Sheridan College?" I said, "No, what's that?" He says, "Well, it's a community college in Ontario, just outside of Toronto, and they have a classical animation program there." I said, "What's classical animation?" He said, "Well, what you're doing, drawing." I said, "Well, what would I do there?" He goes, "Well, you can get a job in a studio." And it seems so silly, but that's when I figured out, somebody makes these things. They're not just all old films after all, and they're going to need people to do them, and maybe I could do that. Now, it took a lot of hubris, but I applied, and I got in, because very after the fact, discovering how lucky a break that was, because it was an Ontario community college, and so they had a very strict quota for tax reasons, how many non-Ontario people they could take. In our year, there were 4 groups, and it was about 30-something students a group, as I recall, and I think there was maybe 4 of us that weren't from Ontario, 2 or 3 in my class, maybe a bit more, but I seem to recall a very, very slender percentage, no more than 10 for sure, because it was for Ontario people, It was quite the culture shock to go there, I gotta say. I'm English, but I grew up in Montreal and went to French school. Never went to English school, so that I could survive in Quebec, and because I could speak French. At the time, and as I understand still today, it's illegal for French people to send French kids to English schools. And my mother very dutifully went to get the proper piece of paper from the government, whether it was a license or permission slip or whatever, or a tax or something probably that had to be paid, that because my mother and my father were Anglophones, officially registered as English people, that I was entitled to go to an English school if they wanted to. The French citizens, Francophones, had no such privilege, and the students were condemned to French schools. But many English parents sent their kids to the French schools. They'll learn English at home and learn French in the school, much to the eternal anger of the French parents, who said that the English kids dumbed down the classes and wrecked their own kids' education. So there's always a lot of hostility. Anyway, so this is a long way around to the point. I never had any real English education. When I went to CEGEP, the college there in Quebec, that was in English. That was the first time I got any English. So there I am in Sheridan, and people are saying, "Where are you from anyway?" It's like something about my voice. "Where are you from?" "Well, I'm from Montreal." "Ah, I thought so, because of the French accent." It's like, "But I'm English!"
If you don't mind my asking, it just suddenly piqued my interest. How did your parents end up in Quebec anyway?
Well, my mom's born there, born and bred. She was. My mom was the sort of middle, I guess, 1, 2, 3, third child of my grandparents. One, the daughter of an Irish family that came over, and my grandfather. Both of them very much heroes to me then and still today. My grandfather in particular for making a real tough choice coming over from Germany. His own father, that would be my great-grandfather, was killed, I guess a timely comment, he was killed in August 1914, beginning of World War I. He was drafted into the German army. In the cavalry, I guess. He was an innkeeper that was in the cavalry there and was killed right away. And left my grandfather's mother a widow with all these kids that she couldn't support. And she had to decide, some of the kids would go over here, some of the kids would have to be sent elsewhere, that they couldn't all stay with her. My grandfather's character was such that one of his uncles liked him so much, he didn't want, after the war now, he didn't want him growing up in that Germany. And as the family story has it, around 1930-31, he offered my very young grandfather a choice. A certain stipend that he could use to attend some trade school in Hamburg, I guess it was, the big city next to where they were living, or to take that money and instead use it for a one-way trip or ticket to North America by ship. And in those days, that was a one-way trip. You didn't go back and forth like you might do today. So he didn't like to talk about it very much. So we all just know little pieces of the story, and you put it all together. The SA was around in those days, starting street fights and beating people up all the time. That would sort of try and express an opposite opinion. They would show up at your house and beat you up. And my grandfather said they shot his dog, and that was the tipping point. That he was going to sort of leave his country behind, go somewhere else. One story that we don't understand is that, like a lot of Germans back then, he really loved the westerns of Karl May. There's a name that maybe 1 out of 1,000 people know today. He was sort of the Louis L'Amour of Germany. This guy has never been west of the Rhine, and yet he wrote all these westerns that everybody loved, these pulp novel westerns in Germany. Huge, huge thing. I've looked into it once I found out, because I'd heard about him from anyway. Big thing. And because of that, he really wanted my grandfather to say, it'd be cool to go and live in America. All these westerns and things. So why he ended up in Montreal, we don't understand. Did he get off too soon on the boat or whatever? But it was a heck of a thing. I mean, he knew not a soul in the whole continent. And talk about lonely. And he could barely speak English. Certainly couldn't speak French. And everyone was having to survive. And he didn't have much of a childhood. He had to work. He had no father. His father died when he was just a little kid, infant. Didn't really know his father. So he meets my grandmother at a dance. So the story goes, and fall in love and end up with a rather big family, 8 kids. One of the huge sort of pyramids there. And my grandmother's story, very awful too. Mother abandoned her. So she spent her childhood in the streets of Montreal with a grandmother and taking care of her sister, Phyllis, who became a big radio actress in Montreal. Phyllis Carter, the woman of 1,000 voices. I've never heard of that. But I thought that was cool growing up. Anyway. So these two people that had really no family, not really much anyway of what it is to have a family, were inspirational models for what a family should be, could be. It was precisely because they didn't have one, I think, that they were so devoted to creating one and modeling a good one. And all of the aunts and all of the uncles and all of the cousins would get together week after week after week after week, usually at their farm, at my grandparents' farm. When one or the other would pass away, we'd go to various places, and still today, people are all keeping in touch. During war, things got quite dicey. Canada wasn't very nice to the Germans, so my grandfather got a rough time, and all my family got a rough time for the last name. It was a German name. Little farm town. Didn't treat him very well. My grandfather further rises in my estimation because his brothers became very fervent Nazis, very unrepentant Nazis after the war, still very pro-Nazi. And during the late 30s, early 40s there, that window where before America got in, they were trying to get my grandfather to come back and join the cause. And here again, I only have pieces of the story. He told me, they sent him a medal, one of the medals they had won, and they had swastikas on it. And my grandfather was like, what am I going to do with this? So he hid it in the barn, up in the rafters. Fast forward, they move. They get some other place more downtown. They would go all over the place. And the new owners find the medal. They contact the RCMP. They beat a path to Grandpa's door. And he's got a lot of explaining to do, you know. So, thankfully, his boss, he was a butcher at that time, his boss went and testified on his behalf. His Jewish boss went to testify on his behalf. You know, no, this guy, he's okay. And so my grandfather got out of the pokey, and he had to report. He told me he was supposed to report once a month to the RCMP to say, I'm still here, this is what I've been doing, and so on. And he went every week because he didn't want anything to do with what his brothers were fighting for. He didn't want anything to do with that. And I find that so admirable, you know, that he put truth, he put honor, he put family, he put all good things before his own family. After the war, it was quite awkward. They came to visit once when I was a little kid. I guess I would have been about 10. So I got to meet one of my uncles, the one that was in, I think he was the one, Uncle Herman, was in the Luftwaffe, the Air Force, but as a messenger, as a motorcycle guy, and his wife. And, you know, very awkward because of their position, political position. Hitler was a great guy, and so on and so on. He gave us all these jobs, and so on and so on. And yet I remember as a little kid having a really hard time reconciling that they were so nice. You know, I remember very well sitting on my, great aunt, I guess she would be, my grandfather's sister, sister-in-law, sitting on her lap at midnight or so watching this amazing meteor shower. And she was all like, oh, look at this and look at that. Isn't that great? Very engaging, you know, as you would be with a little kid, you know, trying to help show the miracle, the beauty of nature and all that. And as the years go on, I wonder, how could this kind of nice person be a Nazi? But she was. Anyway. So that's how my mom got there. My dad was British. And, 1950s. He couldn't find any work in Britain in his trade. He was an electrician in a coal-powered country. And this happened a lot. Britain in those days, much like Ireland, I guess, generations before, you'd send your unemployed away. Canada had a deal, lots of work in Canada, no work in Britain. So a lot of guys his generation came over here. He's in Toronto, he's in Sudbury for many years, working in the mines. And one of his friends gets a job in Montreal at this new factory that's starting. And his friend says a good word about my dad. And I can't remember now the specific job, but my dad had the skills he needed starting this thing up, so he goes there. And he meets the receptionist, my mom. And then they get married eventually, and then I come along.
Okay.
Wow.
So that's how they get there.
I'm sorry to divert from animation. I mean, I just suddenly...
No, it was very interesting.
Yeah, suddenly I was very curious.
Yeah.
Well, it's history going full circle, because I don't live anywhere near where I grew up either. I reached the point where I said, I just don't want to live in this country in Quebec anymore. Mm-hmm. And I left.
It kind of is its own country.
Yeah, and it was a very hard thing to do. It's your home, you know. A lot of my family was there. But I didn't... I figured I'm going to have to leave anyway sometime. Better to get out now, when I'm sort of an agent of my own change here.
If I may ask, what is the animation industry like in Quebec compared to that of, say, Vancouver?
Super busy. Quebec's its own nation. I mean, they have their own language, right? So right away, it's their own culture. And so they need their own films, they have their own TV shows, they have their own thing. They have some of ours, and then they have theirs. Right? Now, Canada is only so big, so where they can, they try to make something that can be put on sale everywhere, and not just have to depend on a couple of million customers, but on 30 million customers, or hundreds of millions of customers if you can get into next door, into the States. For cartoons, that's a lot easier than for live action stuff and for the stand-up comics and everything that they have. But there's a lot of very prominent entertainers that are from Quebec. Celine Dion is a Quebec singer. Right? Do you know her?
No. I'm afraid I don't really know.
She's a famous Canadian singer. She sang the theme for the Titanic.
Oh, sorry, I misheard. Yes, no, I am familiar with Celine Dion.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
I wouldn't blame you.
I'm not a fan, I will be honest. Though there is on the show we're working on at Atomic, there is a joke where they have a penguin whose name is Penguin Dion, like Penguin Dion. Yeah, so she sings. And I guess it's obviously a shout out to her. But yeah, so if we can get back on track on...
Oh yeah, sure. I guess where we left off, I was at Sheridan College.
Yes.
All right. So, I guess I'm a bit of a troublemaker, as I wasn't very happy at the place. I guess as a bit of legal protection. No comment at all on anything that's going on there now. For all I know, it's a completely different place. Not so pleasant when I was there. Most annoying was I never got Wayne as a teacher. He would come and go, and I never got to see him. I never had him. I probably would have had a completely different life if I had had him as my teacher back then. I heard about him, but I never saw him. In fact, never met him until just a few years ago. But anyway, when I was there, boy, I gotta say, not much help. You're very much on your own. And so in some ways it was good, because if you really wanted to learn, no one's going to bother you. They do whatever you want, learn as much as you can on your own. I was quite helped by Mr. Nosey going into the library and poking around. So what kind of books do they have here? Couldn't wait to get into the library, to be honest, to find what books exist about animation. I couldn't even know that back then. And there's this binder, not a book. There's this binder on the shelf. I thought, oh, that's curious. Did somebody leave some notes here or something? Sure enough, it's notes. It's Richard Williams' notes.
Oh, wow.
It's in fact notes. Now they were. I found it after the fact. They were not Richard Williams drawings, but they were cleaned up versions of drawings that he took as notes from Art Babbitt's training sessions back when he had brought over Art Babbitt to teach everybody. Yeah. And Sheridan College, very much the Alexandrian library of animation. People would come and go through there and leave behind what they had. It was an amazing place to trade. I had cartoons on video, very painstakingly amassed, often transcribed from films that I had bought to have them, little Super 8mm films and stuff. That was the only way to see anything, was to get to buy the thing. And so I had mine to barter and trade, and model sheets and old animation drawings photocopied and whatnot. Everybody had a stack, and so like dealing cards as little kids would, you would trade your drawings and so on, and accumulate and accumulate and accumulate. And here was this treasure. And I remember thinking, why isn't this being taught? Look at all this amazing stuff. And it's all the stuff that's now in his book, the Animators Survival Kit, all these cool lessons and things. And especially the philosophy of look for all these fun variations of the pattern. You learn the formula, and then you spend your life finding fun variations of the pattern. And for me, that's sort of a seed that very much took root, very much how I like to do everything that I do. You learn something in a basic, pure way, stripped as much as possible of any extenuating circumstance that might arise from style or something. And then from there, you have the foundation to build on and to go off into who knows where. As a kickstart to experimentation, you start off throwing all of the formulas upside down. I'm told to start here and then there. What happens if I start in the middle? What will happen to my scene, to my movement, to my performance? What happens? Anyway, so I was a pretty unhappy customer by the end of the second year. Pretty disillusioned about the school. Now, in those days, 3-year program, in those days, to make the school look good, only, I think, my opinion, only third-year students would ever be allowed to be part of the cattle calls when a studio would come to interview or whatever. Only the third years, the final year students would be allowed. that way the best. I guess the presumption is too, they're the guys that are going to be graduating, so give them the shot. If someone's in second year, they still have another year to go, and you want the money, and it's maybe good for them to get all the study, to get a degree and all that. Well, there was once a visit from a studio in Montreal. And it was known that when my study was done, I was going to go actually back to Montreal and work. And so, to give him credit, Barry Parker came over, one of the layout teachers. And he says, look, maybe he doesn't want me to say this, I don't know. Maybe he broke studio policy in saying it, it's school policy, rather. But he says, look, I can get you into this list if you want, because it's studios in Montreal. And I never asked him, but I've always wondered, was he doing that to get rid of me, or was he doing that to help me out of sort of genuine concern? So I was Mr. Nervous. As far as I know, I was the only second year on that list. This was sort of my first animation job interview. And oh boy, it turns out it was, I learned later, that was the producer and the director. And the producer kept making all these notes and then sort of hiding his paper with his hand. What is he writing? I didn't say anything, I thought. I'm just being Mr. Me here. And what's he writing? What's he writing? It was so unsettling. Oh, my God. It was so unsettling. And so anyway, that was done. And I got a call back to go and do a test. In those days, you always did a test to get a job, unless somebody knew you. You always did a test, and typically would go there to do the test. That's your portfolio, that's your demo, prove it, to recreate something. And inevitably, the tests would be really a test. There'd be something wrong with what you were given, and that would be part of the test. Do you even know that that's wrong? Do you question it? How do you respond? Mm-hmm. Sometimes you would go like, it's okay that I don't have this, I don't know how to draw it. Isn't there a model sheet for that or something? Aha, okay, no, just do it, whatever. And sometimes, aha, here you go. That you knew to ask, once it was, whoops, let me give you another test. Anyway. No, I guess this is, I don't really tell the story too much. I'm just thinking now. But this is I thought, a pretty useful bit of advice. Because I went on a Saturday as I was supposed to. And I was there at the time I was supposed to. So I rang the bell to get in. And nobody came. So I rang it again. Waited, I thought, an appropriate time. Nobody came. Rang it again. Nobody's coming. So I left. And that was a long block or two. And I felt like I'm leaving animation. That's kind of apocalyptic and stupid, but I felt like I have been sort of, the gates of heaven have closed on me, or I've been kicked out. I'm not welcomed in the business. That's how I felt. And I stopped in my tracks. I said, by God, I want in this business. I want to do this. I'm not going to let this stop me. And I turned around and I went back a fourth time. I rang again and I said, I'm not going to leave. I was told to be here. There's got to be somebody here. I rang again. And the guy comes. And it's the director. He goes, oh, sorry, I was on the phone. Was that you ringing before?
Jeez.
So I thought, imagine if I had just kept on going. Imagine if I was a quitter. Because I'm a pretty shy guy. And I was extremely shy back then. It took a lot of guts just to go, for me, wimp that I was, it took a lot of guts to go to the test in the first place. So I'm pretty proud that I went back. And I always feel that way about anything that's tough, So get up and do it again. Try again. If that doesn't work, well, then try again. Just keep trying.
Jeez, I mean, that's good advice, I think, because I've also been there in the sense of it's not going my way, and then I'll just walk away from it and eventually try again in a few months, but you do question yourself, right? Like, why didn't you just push it or whatever? I mean, your destiny's in your own hands, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I believe that.
If I may, it's, well, kind of hit me right here when you said that, just because, like, in my own personal experience, it's been very difficult because it always feels like no matter what path I take, it's always the wrong one. So, I don't know, and it does get really disheartening after a while to just keep trying after you've failed so many times. At least that's what it feels like to me.
Well, yeah. You see, there's an incalculability to life that you shouldn't really forego. Don't underestimate. Like, back then, I gotta say, I hated school. Because I went to really rotten schools all my life. The one that CJEP and a couple of courses in there, notwithstanding a good exception, but otherwise, it was awful. Teachers I had were terrible. One day, a math teacher asks me, what do you want to do when you grow up, kind of thing. And I said, I like to be an animator. I like to draw cartoons. I would love to do that as a living. And she made me stand up in front of the class and had everybody shut up and listen to what I had just told her. And everybody laughed. It happened to everybody, all the time. The French hated the English, resented the English, and they made sure we knew it. Right? So I really detested school. So I guess what I'm saying is you end up sideways sometimes, and you discover this is where I should be. Right? That's how I feel here, is that I'm where I should be. I feel like I can make a difference here, doing what I do. All the blessings of loving history and now being able to teach history. I never would have thought to do that for a living, and it's an amazing job. It's an amazing job, and so the failure isn't so much now you're going backwards. Maybe just see it as now you're going kind of sideways. Maybe that's the path you're ultimately best to be on. You can't know. You can't know. And it's not as if a failure is a loss, that, I didn't get anything from that. There's always a lesson. There's always a lesson. And you learn a lot more by failing. That's the most important kind of freedom, is freedom to fail, to choose what to do, and maybe you choose wrong, and now you'll learn. Not just somebody telling you or trying to get you to do something, but you'll know in a way that they can't take away from you. That doesn't work.
I was watching Meet the Robinsons recently. I've never seen that movie. It was just one of those things that I'm going to see this eventually, and I never do. Mm-hmm. So finally I decided I'm going to sit down. I only got halfway through it because I had to do some work at home, but I'm about halfway through it, and I got to the part where, what's the main character's name? Like Lewis or something? Where he tries to fix the little peanut butter and jelly like gun or something, where it's they have all the toast in this little gun and it shoots peanut butter and jelly, but it gets on the fritz. So he's given the task to try to fix it, but he fails, and he gets so upset when he fails, like it just shoots peanut butter and jelly like all over the kitchen, and he's just like, I'm sorry, I am so sorry, I can't believe I failed again, and everyone applauds him. And the family goes, yeah, great, you failed. Now you can learn from it. And I had to sit back and here I am. Because I'd been having a really rough week, and so just the weight of the world on my shoulders, like all the things that I've done wrong throughout my life is coming back to haunt me. And I see this scene, and I'm like, wait a minute, I never thought of it that way. Why didn't I see this movie before? This might have saved me a whole lot of heartache.
See, at the very least, your experiences make you sympathetic when somebody else fails.
Mm-hmm. I definitely have a lot
That's not a loss.
I definitely have a lot of sympathy for people who fail because they're trying. Mm-hmm. I have nothing but sympathy for people who was like, I've done so much else, and I tried this, and I tried this, but nothing's going my way because I've lived that. Mm-hmm. Not so much for people who was like, I want to do this thing. I'm like, well, then do the thing. But I don't want to do the thing because it's hard. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, maybe if you just took the first step, you'd find that the rest of it would go a little bit easier. you know, instead of just, I have a vague outline for the big comic I'm going to do, and then it just sits there. It's like, well, maybe you should draw the first page.
I think artists should get used to suffering. It's not welcomed, but nevertheless helpful factor in becoming better. You really sweat at something, and it makes a big difference.
As a teacher, though, you must see that a lot as well. Like some students who just don't want to try, versus those who try so hard.
Well, if there's one thing I've learned as a teacher, it is the vast spectrum of ways of being, of the uncountable ways there are of being a success and a hard worker and not so hard a worker, and a guy that doesn't try very hard, or a girl that doesn't care very much, and so on. I could never have imagined the parade of humanity, the different ways that there are of being before I was a teacher, even having met hundreds and hundreds of people, worked with so many, and so on, and all the places, and so on. You see people that really have this passion to do it really well, and you get the sense, gosh, it'll take forever for them to get anywhere. And then there's others that have this amazing talent and don't care, don't do anything with it, you know. And you wish you had some kind of magic syringe and you could sort of suck out it's to take out the skill of one and inject it into the other, and maybe take some of the despair out of one and just get rid of that so they don't have it anymore, and so on.
Well, back to your life. So you've just now gotten your first job, right?
Yeah. I started as an in-betweener, as I guess we all did a lot of the time back then. You do the middle drawings in between the animators' poses. That job was still being done in North America back then. It was for a CBC French show. And I did that for, I guess, a couple of seasons. And, oh boy, so exciting. The first day I got to see my name on television in the credits, a big family event. We all gathered around to watch. It was quite the day. Even though I had made quite a ceremony with my first paycheck. I wanted to make it as triumphant and memorable an occasion as possible. And that too, I think, I always try to pass on as advice. In this era of direct deposit, it's not quite the same, I suppose, as physically holding that check right there and so on. And you have often the stories of people framing their first check and all that stuff. I couldn't afford to do that. I had to cash it. But boy, did I make a ritual out of possessing that first check. And I reviewed all of the hardship, all of the struggle, because this doesn't come easy to me. I had to completely unlearn how I drew. I went in from scratch, having to learn everything. And even the very first job, when I did the test, I thought I did pretty good. It only took me 3 hours to do the in-between. And when I brought it over to the director, he'd been waiting for me. He goes, I was going to go see if you were still here. I thought maybe you left. That doesn't bode well. And he says, so you've been working at this, all these sort of flipping, you've been working at this all this time, since like whatever one? Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, I did it in only 3 hours. I really aced this test. And he goes, flip. Charles, flip. I could do this in between in 10 minutes, which he does. And in about this half-hour block, well, him sort of talking and so on, I learned more about in-betweening and animation than I did in 2 years at the school that I had been at and in the program that I'd been at. And when I started teaching here, I made a sort of a personal vow. By God, no one under my watch is going to go through one of those humiliating moments where they think that nothing they learned in school is right, and that there was this other technique the whole time that everybody really uses. And hopefully that's going to continue to be the case, because by God, I would never want anybody to go through what I went through that time. So I did that for a while. Very, very fun place to work, I gotta say. not that we did world-changing work or anything, but it was a very fun place. The English-French tension's not so bad. Everybody kind of, I think really got along. And they were very, and this is quite common, I guess. I presume where you work it's like this too. Everybody likes to help everybody, right?
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of that. Everybody likes to help everybody. For a while there was, they weren't able to get another show to overlap with the one that we had. And so there was going to be this rather extensive layoff. And they made a very generous offer to us. They said, if you want, still, we're going to hire you guys again. You just can't do it now. But in the meantime, if you want to come in and practice, use the paper, use the camera, show us, So I went to my boss in the in-between department. I went to the guy in the cleanup department. That was the assistant animation department, one step up, and to the animation director. And I asked for like a crash course in these other jobs. And every day I went in and practiced. I had the whole building to myself except for these guys. The handful that were paid to be there, the supervisors, to kind of get ready for the next show. And I'd sort of work a few days or whatever it took to get something to show, and I would show them. And I kind of think that's my schooling in animation. I go and get old dialogue clips and the breakdowns on the exposure sheets, and I taught myself dialogue. Taught myself action analysis. I taught myself planning. I taught myself everything. Well, with these guys, to be fair, these guys teaching me. And one day, just turns out to be just a couple of weeks before everything starts up again, the head of the cleanup department calls me into his office. Now, this was new. Usually I have to go see him. He would come over and chat, but he'd call me to his office. And he closes the door. Ooh, that's interesting. And he goes, Charles, I've been watching you here and the work you're doing, and I want to offer you a promotion to be a cleanup artist when our next show starts. So, woohoo! Sort of dancing in the halls for that day. 4:30. The animation director calls me into his office. I'm like, oh, what's this? Because I had done one of the animation tests, like one of the official tests. And I thought I'll do it just to see how close I am to getting there, and then next year or whatever, I'll try again. See, in those days, it was this glacier pace to advance, Getting a job as an animator, not so common when you get out of school. And so one expects to kind of learn the ropes and work your way up the ranks, So, end of that day, the director calls me into his office and he goes, Charles, we've been reviewing your test, and I want to make you an offer. I want to make you an animator, a junior animator on our next show. It's like, woohoo! So I went home, hey, I got 2 promotions today. My mom was like, what do you mean you got 2 promotions? Well, I went this morning, I was made this, and then in the afternoon, I was made that. I was like, who gets 2 promotions in a day? Like, it's so funny.
Well done.
Oh, that was a very fun, I think it was a Friday. That was a very fun day.
Okay. If I'm curious to actually know, because you have mentioned to us before, but I guess for the show, what shows have you worked on?
Well, there's lots of very famous Canadian cartoons that you'll come back to. Oh gosh, let's see. I worked on La Bande à Ovid. I worked on, so I guess that was 2 seasons. I worked on Sharky and George. I think that was 2 seasons. Flying Bears. I worked on Clyde. That's an acronym, CLYDE. I worked on it's a lot of educational things. There was one, Les Aventures de l'Écriture, the adventures of writing, literally, but sort of language in the translation. Lots of commercials. Without dragging this out too much, I'll say that I get to a point where I go back and forth between Montreal and Toronto, depending on what I where I felt like living. This is a certain amount of initiative that I would never display today. That I just decided, I feel like living in Ottawa, and go move there, and then go, oh no, where am I going to work? And read into it what you will, but you could earn a living that way. I didn't collect unemployment ever. I was always working. I'd decide where I wanted to work, and I'd go there and I'd work. I didn't own a house or anything, so it was pretty. I just pack up my stuff in a car and just go to another province and live for a year or whatever. There was a brief interlude where I got into comic book distribution, and I wanted to bring anime to North America, and I had a very crusader motive. I wanted to crush a lot of the North American, what was becoming sort of the standard cartoon, and I wanted to bury it with what I thought was a much more superior approach to the medium for children, for sort of match the low budgets and so on. And I thought if people could see for themselves, then they'll choose that. Right? I'd like to think we made a difference. I don't know. Who knows? Because for a long time you couldn't see any of these things. And also, I really resented, no offense, but I really resented Marvel and DC and Image Comics and what they were doing to comics, which I love, what they did to the business, which was level it to the ground.
Yeah.
And I wanted to show that there was an alternative, which in those days was called alternative comics. I don't know what it's called today. Comics, I guess, because they win. I mean, now Marvel and DC are alternative comics. They have all those guys working for them, and the whole point is to do things that are totally different all of the time, and so on. I did that for a while. I don't know what else. Let's see. Am I missing stuff? We forget these things. It's been so long.
So many things.
But I don't know. I haven't really worked on anything famous, I guess. I've just worked.
Well, you
worked
mentioned
on Honeycomb Kids commercials, and I guess I could talk about that for a sec. I worked on some commercials that were made in the wake of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where for a while the trend was cartoon characters in a real world, a la Roger Rabbit style, with the shading on them, and they were interacting with the sets and everything. Holy moly, what a production! I'm sure these days it would be done at a fraction of the cost and at a even more microscopic fraction of the difficulty, because you had a photostat, which is a particular kind of photograph of a film frame, and it's opaque because it's a photograph. It's not transparent. It's a photograph, and it's this sort of 12-field size for every frame, and somehow it's registered, it's punched. I don't know how that was done, but it was done. So you get these things, and they're kind of numbered, 1, 2, 300, 400, and so on. And so you put your drawing on top of the photograph, and maybe it's Leslie Quick Bunny there, the chocolate milk bunny, and he's behind a couch that the kids are on, and he's sort of jumping on the pillows. And you have to have this match line, and it has to be perfect, so that he's behind the arm of the kid and behind the couch, so that when he's jumping on, he's coming from inside that set. So you kind of do the drawing, and you have to sort of flip to make sure, no light table here to make it match the photograph. You have to flip, and your eye has to be such that it is perfect. And then you take the photostat off the cell, and you have your drawings, and you flip your drawings. How's my action? How's the scene? Okay. Then you put the photostats back, and then you do sort of the next one. And you take it off, and then you flip. How's that coming? Okay. Then you put it back on, and so on, all day long for all the time. And what we did was, I guess, pretty good, but just a fraction of the quality to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So, my gosh, my hat is off to them for the quality. It's just superhuman effort to do something like that. And so fast. How do you do that stuff so fast? Oh, my God. That was very, very memorable. Commercials were so much fun, because unlike in a TV show where it's always the same, it can be wearisome, if it's not a fun show. Commercials is different every couple of weeks. You know, it takes like 6 weeks or whatever to do the whole thing from day one to the end. Eh? So every week you're maybe drawing in a different style. One commercial we used 6B pencils to get this sort of chalky, thick black line for SpaghettiOs or one of those kind of things. And then the next week it's a commercial for some life insurance, and it's this dot 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 line with a mechanical pencil, you know, and you're getting sort of artistic whiplash in the most delightful way possible. It was like Turkish bath for artists, where you get this cold water splash and then into the steam room, and you come out, bucket of cold water splash, this system shock all the time. The only frustrating part was that it wasn't really regular. It would be feast or famine. Now, I was pretty lucky because I was earning enough that if it was going to be 2 or 3 weeks until they needed me again, I would just keep busy. I had the time of my life in these interims. I'd go to the zoo and sketch. I'd go to the museum. And this was in Toronto, an amazing place for artists, at least back then. So much to do. There were movie theaters that only played old movies and all kinds of things. There was this bizarre. The thing I really miss about Montreal and Toronto that just can't hold a candle out here is that you had so many things you could do. Like take movies. So help me. There was a bicycle repair shop that showed silent films with live musical accompaniment on a piano. Right in the middle of all these bikes hanging around. And I got to see so many Russian silent films there, week after week after week. This really amazing pianist. For all I know, his day job was working for the Toronto Philharmonic or something, and his hobby, I guess, presumably, was to do this stuff. It was amazing. And it was like $2 or $3, you know, and you get to see this live show all the time. Toronto was full of that kind of stuff, you know, full of that kind of stuff. Nothing like that out here, you know. It's a tiny city by its standards of these things. I guess they can't support that kind of thing, or just maybe not the imagination or initiative. Who knows? There used to be a type of theater, cinema, called a repertory cinema. So you had these were usually quite old movie theaters. You had the first run films, Book of Life, let's say, that's playing in a certain kind of theater. And meanwhile, something from a season or two before, The Croods, maybe to stretch the point, is playing at a repertory theater, you know? So if you're willing to wait a while and pay a little less, maybe half, you can see it in a rep theater. And in between, the ones that would sort of make their bread and butter, the big Hollywood films, be all kinds of stuff. International films, shorts for an hour and a half. You know, I saw so many old cartoons in rep theaters. It's some kind of weird package of short films, you know. In Montreal, you had the Cinémathèque Québécoise. That's the movie museum that preserved the Winsor McCay films. All the ones that you guys saw, you only get to see because they spent money many decades ago to keep them when nobody else wanted to do that. And they had shows every day, often guests talking. But once a month, silent films. And there was another pianist over there that would play along with them. Where's that here? Can't see that here. Oh, you could. But I made it happen at Van Arts. I had a student that was a very good organist. And I guess the context was talking about the silent film experience in history class. He approached me after and says, "Well, Charles, I would love to take a crack at that. That sounds amazing." Okay. So in those days, I used to have something I called the Monday night movies, where now I have history bonus features on Friday. But in those days, I showed stuff Mondays at 5. And it wasn't directly tied into any, it was just something I wanted to see pretty much, and I wanted to see it in the theater, and I thought the students would benefit from seeing it. So I'd show Frank and Ollie, the documentary, maybe some silent comedies, something or other that I figured they probably had, and I wouldn't have had the chance to show in class. So we arranged for that. We showed Nosferatu. the silent film, the German one,
Yeah.
expressionist film. And he did a masterful job. It was very, very well done. And the place was packed. Usually maybe 4 or 5 people, 10 people is a big crowd. We had the whole place full. Every student wanted to see this from hearing about what it was like as an experience. And he delivered. He made it even scary. He did a very good job. And for the year or so he was here, we did it 3 or 4 times. We did Phantom of the Opera, the silent one, with Lon Chaney there, the famous makeup. We did a Buster Keaton one, Sherlock Jr. Seems to me there's another one in there I'm forgetting. But, that was great.
Yeah, that sounds
So if you want something done, you do it yourself.
that's pretty much it, right? Because one of my favorite film directors, he pretty much says a similar thing, where it's if he thinks of something, in the end it's only he who can make it, right? You know, because if he wants to see it, it's up to him to make it.
I subscribe to that.
That's why Tusk exists. About a man who turns into a walrus.
Well, okay, well, okay, well, I think I've kept you in, for enough time, Charles. So I don't want to take up too much of your evening.
Yeah,
I'd
this
like
has been
to
fun. This reminds me of my old radio days. This sort of talking business. It's kind of fun.
Oh, I love old talkie radio. It's made somewhat of a comeback with podcasting. You know, people just chat and you know, talk about things that interest them, or it's, you know, I think with the internet as it is now, just opening up a wider world to each other, and people finding similar interests with each other, and then those communities grow bigger. So
yeah, well, it's great that there's no, like on radio we had these breaks where you maybe have to stop at a time to there's a commercial, a hard break, you have to have a commercial and so on. And in a podcast you just let the conversation go. And you can listen to it anytime you want. You don't have to listen at 8 o'clock and then you've missed it, it's gone. And so you can listen anytime you want.
Well, I'm hoping one is you got to buy this product, but you know, as long as
stitch that in afterwards, you don't have to write the conversation.
Yeah. So okay. Well, I just want to sort of tie this up with a couple of quick questions. Just some of your favorites. I know I asked you before the show, but you know, we can answer it as you please. If you can give me a favorite film. You know?
Well, it tends to alternate over the years. You know, you depending on your life, you end up with different favorites. I've found. For me, it goes back and forth over the last 20 or so years. It's gone back and forth between 2 films. One from 1927. That's Harold Lloyd's film, The Kid Brother. I show clips of that in class. That film did a lot to change my life. Gave me a lot of the cheerfulness and what I hope is a kind of an optimistic attitude that I like to try to have. And the anecdote I guess I mentioned before, that's a scene almost straight out of a Harold Lloyd film. You know, get up and try again. I got a lot of that from that movie. I watch it every couple of years. I used to watch it just every couple of days when I finally got it on video, and I thought, I don't want it to wear out its welcome. I need it to be special. So as I say, I show clips of it in class, and then that whets my appetite, and then I usually watch it shortly after again. And it still affects me like it did the first time. It's just an absolute gem of a film. So beautiful. The acting is so honest, because it's his life. With the film is very much, I mean, all those guys made mirrors of their own lives in their movies with their characters. And in a similar vein, another film that's meant a lot to me over the decades is Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times. It's made in 1936. And I only wish we could have more films like that, in that it's deliberately different. Here he is, a silent filmmaker in a world of sound, and he sort of carves out his own version of what it is to make a sound film. He makes his own genre of what it is to make a movie, you know. And that film is like a cartoon. Some things make noise and some things don't. When things are as they need to be, you know. It is not fantasy or anything, but it's kind of like a Tom and Jerry cartoon or a Coyote cartoon in that respect. It's like a dream. And there's precious few live action films that operate on that level, you know. And that film too, I think, in times of despair and hopelessness, that's a film that's quite a beacon of hope. My all-time favorite song comes from that film, "Smile," which Chaplin wrote. It's sort of the theme music of that film. So depending on sort of my mood or my situation over the decades, it's swung back and forth between those two.
Yeah. No, I can get behind the sentiment of what your favorite movie is at that particular moment. Yeah, also can jump between a few things. Well, I guess the same question goes for television. Any particular television that...
Well, I got to say, I do not watch a lot of television. I watch a lot of documentaries. I don't watch a lot of TV shows anymore. I think a show that probably left a rather deep mark on me is a British show from my youth. It's by a whole bunch of Monty Python, well, not even really Monty Python guys, I was going to say, but from before there was Monty Python, there was an even bigger collection of lunatics. And they kind of divide off. Monty Python and the Flying Circus, that's one team. And the Goodies, that's the other team. And that I would probably think of as my favorite show. What a delightful, creative show. The Goodies are three good guys. The premise is they do anything, anytime, for anyone. So every episode is on whatever. Every episode starts maybe in their office and just goes into something totally different every time. And I have felt ever since, this is the best kind of formula for any kind of TV show. It can go on forever, you know, instead of, they're in school. Well, one day they're going to get out of school, you know, or a family locked in one sort of dynamic where this guy's this old and this girl is this old and this character's this old, and they stay that way forever. It's always the same, you know. These guys, every episode totally different from every other episode. It would alternate between a set where you would have a live audience watching, and then film clips. And in fact, one episode you would, I think, like, takes place in South Africa.
Oh, wow. Really?
And they get hired to boost tourism. And the minister that hires them, he's playing the piano. All of the white keys over here, all of the black keys over there.
Oh wow! I can't believe they got away with it. That's good for them.
That's from the early, I guess 74, 75, 76, somewhere in there. British television.
I actually I saw John Cleese live during his alimony tour, and he actually mentions that group of people that he was with before they started up Pythons.
Bill Odie, Tim Brooke Taylor, and Graham. I can still remember this after 40 years. And Graham something.
I saw it like 2 years ago, and I don't remember.
That show was on 5:30 Wednesdays, and oh boy, did that ever leave a deep mark in me. And to me, it set sort of a standard of an expectation of what I would expect from a TV show, for creativity, for ingenuity, for wit, you know. Ostensibly a kids show, but I've seen some of the episodes. Maybe that's why I remember the guys. I saw one of the episodes not so long ago, because I showed one of your classmates, Emily, a bit about Australia, a bit about Rolf Harris. He's an Australian singer. And I used to kid her. I was the only Australian guy I knew. And I would kid her about this guy all the time. It turns out that he's quite the scoundrel. I didn't realize. As in, like, a suspected pedophile.
Oh my goodness.
He had lots of scandalous headlines. I didn't know. I wouldn't have brought it up at all. But they did such a funny takeoff of an old movie called Born Free, where they have a kind of a wounded tiger or something, and they let it go after years and years of being in captivity. They can't keep the wild animal. It's born born free. It should be let free. And at the end, da, 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 this big, very heartbreaking, as I recall it being so. They sort of slow motion the film so that you really get to taste the excitement of this cat. Like, I'm free. I can do anything. What an exciting, And they're like, oh, and they sort of sit there with this look, in silence, not talking, no dialogue, pantomime, because what words could express the depth of feeling compared to the faces. Anyway, so they make fun of that in this movie. They run a zoo, and all of the animals are celebrities because the animals weren't enough of an attraction, so they got celebrities, and they mate Rolf Harris with other Rolf Harrises. It's like a breed, and in those days he had this big bushy black hair and this big bushy black beard, and so there's a sort of a mama Rolf Harris and a papa Rolf Harris, and just like you would get in the news, the old newsreels, where, oh, there's a baby panda born, and it's a baby Rolf Harris, and this little midget guy with this big bushy beard and the glasses and the hair, and he's sort of walking around, and the narration is, oh, and here's baby Rolf Harris's first day, and oh my gosh, so funny. And at the end, they let him go, and it's like Rolf, and it's like the Born Free, where they're like, oh, and he's like, wow, born free as the wind blows, as free as the grass grows. That was a very, very I was very lucky to be about whenever it was 10, 12, and to watch those for a very, very magical summer way back when.
I must be honest, when you mentioned, as you mentioned the word British TV, I got a little excited. I thought you were going to mention Doctor Who being something you grew up with.
Oh. No, well, I never, in Quebec, I never got to see Doctor Who. It wasn't on.
It
was on in Ontario. I could see it in the TV guide, but we never got the channel.
Oh, jeez.
I didn't get to see that till years and years later. Ironically, in New York, in New York State, where I could get the channel, which I couldn't get in Quebec, on the little Rabbit Ears TV set we had at our summer cottage. And I was quite excited. It was like, oh boy, I've been hearing about this, and in those days you couldn't see anything. I've said now 3 to 4 times. So I thought, I get to see this, and it was Tom Baker. I'm not sure what year that would put it in. 70s still?
Yeah, that's the Fourth Doctor.
Yeah, I guess I was still pretty young then. I probably would have been 12 maybe when I saw it. And I thought, this is Doctor Who. Look, it's so cheap.
Oh, but the special effects are fantastic.
The Daleks.
Still kind of is. I think that's the charm of it.
I would read that, the plots are so creative and the writing is quite amazing, and it's like, oh, okay. I guess I couldn't get over the production values. I've never watched it since, I don't think. Yeah.
I was introduced to the Doctor on our Sci-Fi channel, and I also pretty much started on the Fourth Doctor. It just for some reason it was on, and I fell in love with the show from then onwards. And yeah, when the newer stuff came on, it took me a little while to get into it because I was like binge watching the old stuff, and then when it just transitions into the new seasons, it is different, but it's still enjoyable. Okay, last question, because I actually usually have 2, but the last question is usually what's your favorite video game? I don't know if you're a video game player at all.
Well, I can't lie to you, Wesley. I do play a game once in a while to relax, as I like to listen maybe to some old radio dramas or something on a Friday night when I need to just veg out, or Saturday morning if I'm not hiking that day. I like to play Civilization.
Oh,
really?
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm not very good at it, and I don't really play to get better. Just something to occupy the mind.
Yeah. Well, it's always fun creating your own history, right? Okay, well then this will be the last question. Book, if you have one particular book out of all of history's writings, what is that one book that's inspired you the most?
I guess I'm kind of thinking about that. Maybe this one.
Oh, of Mice and Magic?
It's certainly not the best animation history book ever written, but it was the first one I ever read. 1980, I guess, if I remember correctly. And it gave me a starting point, what to look for old cartoon. I've said it so many times, it sounds like I'm obsessed with it, but I can't say enough how hard it was to learn anything. what was there to learn? I mean, you didn't even know that. What films have been made? Who has been making them? What country even makes films? How will you ever see these things? You know, you might read a book about it, and maybe the guy says that it's a bad film. How would you ever know otherwise? And that's caused a lot of problems in film scholarship. Whoever gets there first sort of creates the history. They see, and that was a fault, I think, of Lerner Malton's book. He could only find a handful of cartoons from certain studios, so he would pronounce years' worth of judgments on a sliver of what the studio did, very unfairly slandering their reputation forever, and still today on the internet. I see these forums. I don't partake that much. And I see people stating things, and you could tell they're just parroting. They haven't seen the film, otherwise how could they say that? Not creative, not funny, nothing to learn, unimaginative, or whatever, echoing an opinion not always from him, but for whoever said it before, and they're just repeating. You know? He makes history fun, and he personalizes it in the way that I feel is very important, that I try to do in my class. You know, you don't memorize names and dates and then use that to get a job. You learn about the triumphs and the failures, and you learn from experience. We have action analysis assignments, and so I teach the history of action analysis. Why wouldn't you have that in an animation history course? We teach storyboarding, so I teach the history of storyboarding. Why wouldn't you have that? Where else were you going to put that? Because it makes a difference how things became the way they are. That's how you learn what you can do with it.
If I may interject here, just as a little anecdote from my end, when I first came to shadow at Van Arts, and the person I was shadowing told me, "You're going to love Charles's history class." I didn't believe her, because I have never loved a history class, even a fraction, as much as I loved your class. Like, I remember the first day I got out of that class, and I was like, I know I'm gonna love it. And it was great, because, and I'm actually a little sad when I realize I could have gone to another school and I could have learned animation history from someone who wasn't you, and it probably wouldn't have been half as interesting. Like, I'm not even, like, it actually saddens me when I think about that possibility. Because it really does. It does tie a nice little bow on everything that you learn, and suddenly, like, you connect all the dots, and I remember when you said, actually, even since I'm currently in the 3D juniors class, I hang out with them a lot, and I was telling them, guys, really seriously, pay attention to Charles's history class. You're gonna love it. And I don't remember which kid it was, but I remember one kid was actually taking notes, and he was getting ripped on by all the other kids. He was like, "Why are you taking notes? There's no tests or anything. You don't need to memorize this stuff." And he said, "No, but I want to know." And I remember I was the exact same way. Like, I actually had an entire notebook filled with stuff, because it was like, I don't want to lose any of this. This is so interesting.
Yeah.
Well, good for you, because it is our fate to forget all this stuff, so you write it down. I write it down so I can deliver it properly.
I tried to bug my brother into. I tried to bug my brother into. It's like, because I had a little recorder that my parents bought me when I went to college, so I could record some of the lectures and later take it on the test. And I tried bugging my brother. It was like, "Can you find it? I need it." I think he lost it, and I never did. And I'm so sad that I didn't bring it with me.
Yeah, well, that's not a bad idea. I like the idea of recording Charles' lectures and putting them online for the rest of the world.
Hey! That knowledge is for the select few that commit to Van Arts.
Yeah, okay, that's only fair.
But nothing I teach is secret. Nothing we do is secret. It's just that we think it's valuable, so we do it. You know?
It's your presentation as well, Charles. You really make it interesting. You know, it's history, and it's available for everybody to find out, sure, but you present it to us, and you make it exciting, and then we go out and search for more, you know, and then we, I guess, share with each other. But I think you definitely plant that seed of excitement with history, and it's definitely helped me at least.
Well, it's an easy cultivation. It is interesting and it is exciting. I'm just echoing the truth in the presentation.
Well, it's like it was like I was talking to you when we were doing because one of my guilty pleasures is I love World War II propaganda cartoons, especially the ones from Disney. I don't know what it was, but it was like the first time, because everyone knows De Fuhrer's face, the one where Donald dreams that he goes to Nazi Germany. So I got curious and I searched it out, and I noticed that there was just a whole list of these propaganda cartoons that Disney had made. And it was the first time I remember that I suddenly understood. Like, I suddenly understood the mindset and what people were thinking back then. And that was vastly more interesting to me than it was, and then this guy was assassinated, so that led to the world going into war, and then that led to this, and this happened, and this happened. Like, that was, the point A, point B, point C. Just stuff happens. And for me, the history class was more so of A led to point B, but it also led to point B1 and then B2, and then B1 led to C1, and et cetera, et cetera. So it was just nice to be able to be interested and to know what people were thinking. Because to me, that is more interesting in history class. What are people thinking back then? What is the mindset? What is the context of this thing that is happening?
Yeah. So I think it's always been a fantasy of mine to time travel. I guess a fitting one for a history teacher. And I do believe that you can. You learn about the past, or specifically the figures of the past and the circumstances that they lived under that sort of helped to make them what they were. And in your own day, you meet people that are like that. And it helps you, and it's as if, it's like I'm talking to Orson Welles, this creative genius, very unreasonable guy, but a smart guy, and hard to work with, but a smart guy. I'll learn a lot, and so on. You can meet these strangers from history by meeting people today. You can sort of I think dare to think. I think I know what it would have been like to meet this person or that person, or a peasant living in this village, or a Roman centurion or something. The more you kind of get to know people today. This not exactly new. This is what Harry Truman used to do. One of the old presidents. He quite the Latin scholar. He loved Plutarch. He was a biographer. He was a Greek that lived in Roman times, so we call him a Roman writer, historian. Plutarch's Lives, do you know?
I'm afraid not, no.
Yeah, you've been to university. Why would you know Plutarch? So he had this amazing way of doing biography, comparative biography. He would take a person from sort of his time, and then he would find someone from antiquity, and he would present both their stories in the same chapter. And he would invite you to draw the lesson that this person is kind of like that one. Cincinnatus, the Roman king who steps down, and then that kind of kick-starts the idea of a senate, of not a permanent ruler or a family that rules, a monarchy, but they kind of get to pick and choose who's the consul and the tribunal of that time and so on. So for a Roman of his day, Cincinnatus, this guy in the past, and he was always kind of like this guy, and so you would learn by comparison. And Truman would do this. He would meet somebody, and as part of his dealings, and he'd go read in the book. So who's this guy like? He's kind of like Alcibiades. This guy reminds me of Alcibiades, and so he got to time travel that way. And I don't remember when I read about that. I thought, boy, that's amazing. And that's sort of the depth that I try to get into now in my own reading. Is that I can understand the past a lot more by living in the present, and not less. And not less, because we don't change all that much as people. We're not all that different, I don't think. We like to think we're so much superior now and so on. We're the same. We're not all that different. People are people.
We just have nicer technology now. All right, Charles. Well, to wrap this all up, do you have a website where people can see your stuff, or you'd like them to,
No.
Not at all?
No.
You don't have a Twitter or nothing like that?
I do, not under my own name, and not for art.
Not for art.
In school, I very scrupulously never talk politics and religion. It's nobody's business. It's certainly not a student's fate to get subjected to whatever I think. I don't do any of that in school.
Okay.
I do all that online, and I keep it very separate.
Okay. All right. Well, then what I'll do is it's fine. I think it's actually a very good idea, because I mean I'm sure you've probably heard enough discussions even amongst students, politics, religion, and whatnot, that you have probably kept out of.
I try to never say anything.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, somebody says something so preposterous. The other day, should I say it? I'll say it. Once upon a time, I heard somebody say to a visiting student shadowing from another country, well, here in Canada, even though we still worship the Queen, and blah, 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 and I just had to say something. I just had to say something.
Yeah, I'm like,
every once in a while, I just have to say something. I had to explain that.
Yeah,
we
geez.
don't worship the Queen. We maybe commemorate her. We don't venerate her.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Charles.
Thank you very much. This was a lot of fun, I guess.
Yeah. Well,
I wasn't sure what to expect. I'm a pretty shy guy. I don't like to talk about myself, and kind of nervous about it. So you're a very gentle inquisitor.
For now. But yes, no, I'm very grateful, and I guess I'll sign everyone off. If you guys want to see the rest of my information, it's at the bottom of the YouTube channel, so you can find the email there and the Tumblr website address. Okay, see you guys next time.
Bye.